So, back in missionary school, close to the beginning, one of the assignments that we had early on was that we had to write an article. And we had to pick what kind of audience we were going to write it to, but we couldn't just pick any topic. It had to be out of one of the parables. So, that's what I did. I looked through the list and I picked my topic and I wrote the article. And I don't think it ever ended up getting published, but then while I was thinking about what I would preach about tonight, I thought, well, I have an article that I wrote a few months ago. What if I preached about that? So I made some adjustments, of course, so I could present it here, but that is what I will be talking about today, the parable of the unforgiving servant. And as Ellen mentioned in the beginning, our key text is found in Matthew 18:22. And it says, Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee, until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. This verse will be the central focus of our sermon, but before we continue, let's talk about the parable. The whole thing starts with Peter, and he goes up to Jesus and asks, how often should I forgive someone? Should I forgive him 7 times? To which Jesus replies with the verse that I just read. I say not unto thee 7 times, but until 70 times 7. He then proceeds to say a parable, which talks about a king. This king had many servants, and there was one in particular, however, who owed him. Was it a small debt? Not at all, right? In the parable it says that he owed a debt of 10,000 talents, which already seems a lot, but do you all know what that would be today? I looked it up, actually, and 10,000 talents would be worth around $3.48 billion today. That's a lot. I was really surprised when I found that out. I mean, can you imagine? Unless you're a billionaire, there's no way you can ever pay that back, not in a lifetime. So, I'd say the servant was in a very difficult situation. What happens next then? Well, obviously, the servant couldn't pay the debt, so the king commanded that him, his family, his possessions, everything be sold so the debt could be paid. Of course, the servant was horrified by this, and he tried to beg for forgiveness. So the king would have patience with him, and he would be able to repay the debt. And it worked. The king had compassion for him, and to the point where not only did he forgive his debt, but he cleared him of it. Imagine getting cleared of billions of dollars of debt. I'd be pretty grateful, and it was a huge mercy from the king's part. So he's cleared of his debt, he goes out, and then I'm sure we all know what happens next. He sees one of his fellow servants, and this servant also had a debt, but it wasn't for the king. It was to the servant that just got forgiven his own debt by the king. It was also much smaller than 10,000 talents. Instead of 10,000 talents, this fellow servant owed the man 100 pence. And I also looked that up, and in today's time, it would be around 4 months of wages. So it's much smaller than the 10,000 talents of debt. But what did the servant do to his fellow servant? Did he forgive him? Did he show him the same compassion that the king did to him? You'd think he would, right? It was such a small debt. But no, instead, as the Bible tells us, he grabbed him by the neck and immediately demanded payment. The fellow servant also begged for another chance, like he himself did earlier. But did he listen? No, instead he cast his fellow servant into prison until he could pay the debt. What he didn't realize was that the other fellow servants had seen what he had done, and of course they immediately went and told the king about it. The king was furious, and rightfully so, right? I mean, this guy, he just forgave him of so much, and only for him to go and basically harass one of his other servants. And then we all know that he was no longer forgiven of the debt, and as the verse says at the end, till he should pay all that was due to him, he was delivered to his tormentors. So we went over the parable, we went over what it was about, but let's talk a little more about it and what we can take from it. Growing up, we have heard about a rule in particular, known as the Golden Rule. We've heard it in places like recess, school, at home, even in church. And the rule is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Bible also mentions this rule, and the most well-known form of it is found in Matthew 7:12. Matthew 7:12. And the verse says, "Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets." Do we always apply this rule to our lives? Not always, unfortunately, right? Especially when we're kids, it can be difficult to live by it. It can be easy to go against the rule, even if it's not something necessarily bad, but how often do we find ourselves treating others in a way that we wouldn't want to be treated? Are there times when we can be like the unforgiving servant? Absolutely, because we were born with sinful hearts. But it shouldn't be like that, right? We shouldn't be like the unforgiving servant. We instead should be the opposite. Let's turn to Romans 12:16, another verse, and see what it says. Romans 12:16, and it says, "Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceit." So this verse is telling us that to not only be mindful to one another, but also not to get caught up in our own pride. Was the unforgiving servant being prideful? Yes, he was. Often we find ourselves in the same situation. We become too proud to admit when we are wrong or to even see when we are wrong. We can become selfish. We can treat others in a way that they shouldn't be treated, and that is detrimental to our character. But then what do we do from here? How can we not be like this? How can we be like the king instead? How can we be forgiving towards people? Are we able to do this on our own? When looking at this parable, what does it remind you of? What do you think of when you hear this parable? Probably our relationship with God. I mean, there's some similarities. At least that's what I thought of. God is like the king in this story. After the fall of man, we became sinners. We were much like the servant in the parable, having a huge debt and no way to pay it. And as a result, our punishment should have been death. But then Jesus intervened, and through God's grace, we are saved. But how many times have we found ourselves not doing the same for others? How many times are we like the unforgiving servant, refusing to forgive? Where would we be if Christ was like that towards us? Can you imagine? Like one little sin and we're lost. None of us would be saved at this point. We'd all be lost if God was like that. Even after everything we did to him, we have wronged him so many times. We sin every day, basically. We have to ask for forgiveness every day. But instead of condemning us like the servant did to his fellow servant, he shows mercy like the king did. He is able to not only forgive our debt, but to clear us of it completely. Let's go to another verse, Psalm 86:5. It says, "For thou, Lord, art good and ready to forgive, and plenteous in mercy unto all them that call upon me." From reading this verse, we know that God can forgive us. He can clear us of that debt that we are unable to pay. But at the same time, is it one-sided? Can we just do whatever and God will continue to forgive us no matter what? No. I mean, while God does forgive, there has to be a change in our hearts as well. We shouldn't ask for forgiveness and then immediately go back to doing what we were before, much like the servant did to his fellow servant. There needs to be a change. How can we make that change? By going to God, because we are unable to do it on our own. And the best part is, he won't turn us away. In fact, Christ wants nothing more than to have us come to him and to be changed. But we have to be willing. And then when we truly follow God and his word, we are changed into his character. But then back to Peter's question in the beginning. He asked Jesus, how many times should you forgive someone? Should it be 7 times? And then Jesus answered, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Was he being literal, though? Are we supposed to tell someone, like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't forgive you anymore. Last week was your 490th time, so can't do it. No. What Jesus was really saying here is that we shouldn't be caring about the number. We shouldn't even be thinking about that. We should be just forgiving someone, as Christ did. Even as he was on the cross, dying, he was still saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is what we should take from this parable. Are we like the unforgiving servant? Or are we like the king, showing forgiveness? I hope it's the latter. I hope that as what we take from this parable, that we learn that we need to do unto others as we want them to do to us, and that we need to follow Christ's example. And in conclusion, I want to read one more verse, and it's Ephesians 4:32, and I feel like it kind of sums up what Christ wants to tell us and what he's trying to tell us from this, what he wants us to do. And it says, and be ye kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. So I hope that as we leave here tonight, that we keep these words in mind, and that we strive to be like Christ in character, and that we may apply the golden rule in our lives. This is my wish and prayer for you all. Amen.